So for me, the best idea out there is the operating company who's the monopoly in the Bitcoin space. And to me, that's I'm going to keep calling it MicroStrategy forever because it's so ingrained. But to me, that strategy, as we're like getting this thing off the ground, as we're getting this plane off the ground, you know what I mean? And I still think we're like stationary on the runway right here, right now.
Aaron here, and in today's interview, we got to interview Ryan from the QuantBros. He's one of the first people who talked about MicroStrategy publicly online, and I know he's helped a lot of people understand the MicroStrategy trade, myself included. Definitely recommend you guys watch this one to the end. You can check out his socials right here, but this was a great interview. Let's go ahead and get into it.
What's going on, Crypto Crew? This is Sean coming back at you. We have another interview today, coming at you with one of the Quant Bros, one of the OG Quant Bros, Ryan, Ryquant, as most of you know. Ryan, appreciate you for coming to the channel.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I can't believe I'm just now finding you guys. You know, Bitcoin Bros, I feel like you guys are like a distant family member that I just haven't met at this stage in the journey in life, you know?
Most definitely. It was meant for us to cross roads eventually. So let's just get straight into it. So a brief intro about yourself. What's your Bitcoin journey? Like, how did you first hear about Bitcoin? Was that MicroStrategy? Because that's what most people know you from. What's that look like, and how'd that work out for you?
Yeah, so this is that classic story that everyone has where they heard about Bitcoin at a much more advantageous price point than when they actually started buying, that gap of time in between. So I first heard the word Bitcoin in September of 2015 from my college roommate at the time, who was a lifelong friend, and he was a couple years younger than me. So he happened to still be at Rutgers at the time when I was a freshman, because I had just done, about 3.5, 4 years in the active duty Army. So even though I was older, he was younger, he was still an undergrad at the time. So we lived together. And that was the first time I'd ever heard about Bitcoin. But at that point in life, like, I'm transitioning from active duty Army, right, and going into full-time college student plus Rutgers Army ROTC, cadet, plus finding a new apartment, plus learning the lay of the land of my new neighborhood, plus the 4 or 5 college campuses at Rutgers. Like, my head's spinning. You're just like constantly drinking from a faucet. And I remember it was like the first week of my first, semester at college. And that's when he brought up Bitcoin. And I'm like figuring out, how am I going to get to each of my classes, like the logistics of my schedule. Where's this building? Where's that building? And he brings up like magic internet money. So immediately just dismissed it without any second thought. Plus, right, I was coming from the Army, like with the deployment in Afghanistan. I had just very much seen like the power, the influence, the ability to control things such as money as the United States, and the global influence it has and things like that. So I would say my first reaction was like, this is crazy, and the government would ban this, right? Like, if we can like go to wars with all these countries and like be in control of NATO, then we can like shut down the magic internet money. So that was where I first, just completely discarded it. And the other thing too with that was I wasn't an investor at the time, right? I didn't have like much money at all in the Army. Like, they pay people like below the poverty line. So I didn't quite have much money. I had the GI Bill to like help me through college. So I wasn't going to go homeless, right? But I didn't have any like real excess capital to start investing. So it was like a wrong time, wrong place. Fast forward a couple years, when I did have like some excess capital and like my truck was paid off. So it was like, okay, now let's start putting money to work. And in September of 2018, one of my college professors happened to be like a Tesla investor. He was like aware of Bitcoin. It was one of the intro computer science courses, so it was kind of like right up his alley. And I'd find myself being like in investor office hours with him, like in addition to class, just talking about Elon Musk, Bitcoin, Ethereum. We had both read a couple books in the space, so I was just like soaking all that up. So I became an investor in September 2018, and this was just after I had, you know, figured out I have to adopt a worldview politically, not for any, not out of like personal interest, but like, okay, it's time to grow up, learn about the world, develop a worldview, which then becomes necessary as an investor. You have to have a macroeconomic worldview, and part of that is politics, both US and globally. And very quickly on that path to learning about politics, I kind of figured out I was in the libertarian camp. And for me, the face of the Libertarian Party is Ron Paul, Dr. Ron Paul. And his message of, you know, crush the war machine, and the kind of interdependency between the war machine and the Federal Reserve and global central banks and manipulating interest rates, and also the interventionist, you know, war policy that America has embarked on for decades now. That was very much what I had aligned with. And, you know, I didn't read it right away, but over the years I read, you know, his book And the Fed. And that is what I just so much like philosophically aligned with, plus some Dr. Safety Moose, author of the Bitcoin Standard. A lot of his fiat standard principles mesh those together, and that's like my political worldview. And Ron Paul had talked about gold. So the idea of owning, you know, a finite, limited asset outside of the system that's not connected to the kind of inevitable political chaos and turmoil, I was like automatically like I was geared towards something like that. Plus then being at college at the right time, doing, you know, intro to computer science and data science work put me in a network of like tech type investors. So that kind of became a right time, right place to start building positions in Bitcoin and Tesla at the time. And of course some other things that didn't work out, but those were the two that were the biggest of the allocation at the time. And then, to be honest, since then, I think it's been a lot of luck. It's been a lot of right time, right place. The you know, most of the growth of my account value of my life has come in the past, you know, 2.5 years with the MicroStrategy trade. But it was because I was, you know, lucky enough to have done the work on a couple things before even buying MicroStrategy. So I was a student of the, you know, volatility as an asset class school of thought, which came into direct application with, you know, buying deep out of the money, longest dated MicroStrategy call options after FTX blew up, thinking that, okay, I think we're at a macro bottom here. Like, I think that was our .com bubble, when you have the premier equities of our life, Tesla and Nvidia, both drawing down 70-75%, also Bitcoin in that 70-75%. It was a big macro bet that we're much closer to the bottom than the top, obviously, but I think this is the bottom. I think the calendar shift into January of 2023 with the end of the tax harvesting, which, you know, is like at the end of December, I think that's going to be the first catalyst pivot point to us like grinding back higher in risk assets. Plus, if we get a little bit of help with rates at least not going higher, but just staying in this range, and then we have the future catalyst of rates going lower. So all of these things and a couple other, you know, M2 type things like that put me in a position where, oh, plus the other thing was, you know, I did not buy MicroStrategy, you know, August of 2020. August of 2020. I did not jump right in. I was still very much doing what Michael Saylor was suggesting, you know, study Bitcoin. I was allocating to that and a little bit of Tesla at the time, but then that fizzled out shortly after. But I didn't jump right into MicroStrategy right away because it was a bigger story than just Bitcoin. It was, okay, wow, this company's been public for like 20 something years. I look at the all-time chart and there's this monster move up followed by a big old move down. And I've never heard of it before. So there's a lot of work to do on the company, on the management. What's their participation going to be in Bitcoin, right? And Michael Saylor himself has talked about this, where he says, at first it was a defensive to keep the company alive, to give us something, a way to fight for our own existence. But then as the months and a couple of years went on, this turned into an offensive strategy where like we're leveraging this as the main value proposition of our company. So I had about 2 years, let's call it, of time from August of 2020 to when FTX, blew up, to have studied MicroStrategy, 2 years worth of Saylor podcasts. My macro called it like, this is the bottom. And then what else? There was one other thing in there. But yeah, so all these things kind of came together, right place, right time. And I was able to feel confident about a serious allocation to the deepest, out of the money, longest dated call options, as well as, buying spot equity at the time. Oh, right. Here was the thing I forgot. You've got all these things happening at once, plus the price of MicroStrategy is within a few dollars of where they started this whole Bitcoin journey in the first place. So I got to do nothing, which this is all benefit of hindsight stuff. The price could have theoretically ran away, and there's an alternate universe in which I never entered the stock because I just completely missed it. So I got to sit back, learn for 2 years, feel very confident and like high conviction about the bottom. Also, the thing about the fraud event that does typically put in the bottom, I forget if it was Enron or WorldCom. Jim Chanos will have to correct me on this. I think it was Enron who kind of put in like this is going to be the bottom of risk assets coming out of the dot-com bubble. But yeah, so you put all these things into a blender, and it was really just like right time, right place. Like if I was to have gone on this learning journey of mine that I just described 5 years from now, it's a totally different story. Same thing as if it was 10 years ago, totally different story. So I say a lot of it was luck, to be honest. And I'll pause there because I know that was a long rant.
No, appreciate you going into your story there. I think a lot of Bitcoiners, even myself, can resonate with your story. It's not just like you can understand, Bitcoin in a year or even 2 years and make the right investments to just be successful in a short time frame. I think a lot of people resonate with that. So that I'm glad that you went into like how you got to where you are today. I would say now we're here. Where do you see the future for Bitcoin, MicroStrategy? Do you have some thesis that you're looking maybe a year, 2 years out to where we could be, just in a couple of years? How you were looking at it just back in 2022?
So back in 2022, my views and my thesis were much more simple and not nearly as complex, because I think we've all learned a ton. To your point about learning, Aaron, I think we've all learned a ton, especially in the past couple of years with things like ETFs coming to market and stuff like that, some nation state adoption. But yeah, in 2022, my view was bullish Bitcoin for sure. But as far as like Bitcoin operating companies, the thesis was very simple. It was like, okay, this is Bitcoin in a security equity operating company package. They have the ability to apply leverage. They have the ability to access capital markets. They have, Michael Saylor, who even at the time, I feel like it was pretty obvious, was like the number one bull in the world on Bitcoin, like the most recognizable Bitcoin bull in the world. So it's like, okay, that's something. And then shortly after that, I got to meet, executives at MicroStrategy of all, rank and stature, and was impressed with 100% of them. So like that was good. But like the point being, like at the very beginning, it was like a very simple like thesis. Fast forward to today, there's just so much more like robustness here, right? Like even in things that like I'm not I'm not able to talk on. Well, I mean, I could, but this just isn't my field. Like things like bit bonds and structured credit and like mortgages that are like, you know, you're taking a loan out against your Bitcoin. Like there's so much creative like innovation there, and like that's only going to continue. MySpace, I would say MySpace. I would say my area would be something like the Bitcoin Treasury, like combining the like equity analyst skill set plus volatility analyst skill set plus like, you know, the quant stuff as far as like understanding like the KPIs and like simulating ways in which, you know, companies can create the most amount of like shareholder value by pulling on certain levers in the capital markets, or just through their, you know, organic business activities, like growing more cash flow to then buy more Bitcoin, and how they can be like opportunistic in that sense. So in that, you know, world, I see more and more and more Bitcoin treasury companies coming to market, each offering some type of their own differentiation. And the reason for this is because I think Bitcoin's killer app, like this is like a big common software, you know, phrase, the killer app. I think Bitcoin's killer app is MicroStrategy, in the sense that the dominant use case of Bitcoin, in my view, and I hope I'm not like offending anyone. I know people take this stuff pretty seriously, but I see it as a store of value asset that can have store of value type premium embedded to it because of the optionality of being able to move it, right? Gold does not, will not in the physical domain. They can try and put this stuff on the blockchain, but gold will never have that optionality. Not that you'd ever want to use it much as a store of value asset, but the ability to treat it as a medium of exchange is what gives Bitcoin immense value. But for me, if you think unit of account, store of value, medium of exchange, I'm very much in the store of value camp. Now, why does that matter in regards to companies? Because a company, especially a public company with the regulatory framework and the legal framework, is the best vehicle for accomplishing a common task, right? It aligns everyone's incentive structures. It provides a ton of documentation to make things abundantly clear. And any founder who's starting a company wants it to live indefinitely, right? So we could say forever. That's the type of entity, any operating company, whether it's private or public, you know, has that kind of like forever time view with good structure. So I'm of the mindset that that type of, you know, private or public companies is going to be much, much more willing to and wanting to adopt a Bitcoin treasury strategy versus the inevitable issues that arise with the human condition of doing this from the family perspective, right? And I hope people do seek the education that they want in order to set folks up with their, you know, their financial assets. And I'm by no means making any type of financial recommendation one way or the other. I'm just trying to express how I feel. I think the problem with the human condition is that, like, let's use my family, for example. So I'm not picking on anyone. I'm really the only investor of the bunch, right? No one else gets this stuff. If I show them a cold card MK4, they'll think it's a calculator. You know what I mean? Most people are not us on financial Twitter, doing podcasts, but meeting new people, talking to them. Most people are stressed out. They have kids. I don't have kids. Most people like my age have kids. They are trying to make ends meet. They might be like a caregiver for a parent or a grandparent. They might have relationship issues with, you know, boyfriend, girlfriend, mom, dad. They might have a million and one other things going on, which is why they're not on financial Twitter. They're not watching CNBC. They don't go to a dinner party and talk about the stock market. You know what I mean? So these, like, inevitably in the human condition, it becomes harder and harder to pass these things on and convince the next generation, like, okay, you have to watch these like YouTube videos of Bitcoin sessions. He's gonna tell you everything you need to know about the calculator that has like a lot of your money on it. It's tough, and this is not specific to Bitcoin either. If you think of the classic story of, grandpa, when he was a young man, started out very poor, but he's a very ambitious, engineer focused, problem solver, entrepreneurial. He starts a business. He puts every blood, sweat, and tear he has into this thing. It becomes an enormous success. He passes the company to his son. His son, wanting to like make dad proud, see the venture through, gives it the good old college try. And maybe he really does, especially in like the Jerry Jones, like cowboy, like family, like things like that. Some of those guys definitely seem like A players. So I'm just speaking in like a broad sense. But then when you get to the grandson, the as you increase the distance between the next generation and the first guy who started it, or gal, forgive me, guy or gal, as you increase that distance, the incentive to care about the business, because you're already born rich, you're a trust fund, like the incentive to like maintain it gets lower and lower and lower. And I think that same phenomenon is just going to play out in Bitcoin. And plus, the last thing I'll say on this too is people are used to sacrificing security for convenience, meaning no one out there has any real concerns over like their online bank. You give them all your data, you give them your password, and then but the positive trade-off there is you can click a link that says like forgot password, and a minute later you're into your bank and everything's fine, right? So people are so willing to make that trade-off that communicating to them about look into all this stuff about like, your public keys and get the hammer and like stamp it in there and like all these things, while they are good, and while like a certain group of the investing class, tech people, fintech people will do that, I don't see the masses necessarily like adopting to something like that.
Yeah, 100% agree. We always say that retail is asleep at the wheel, and they tend to get at the wheel in those euphoric moments in the market, and that's why they tend to always get dumped on. But yeah, it's a struggle to share this knowledge, because you can sit and preach to your blue in the face, but to actually put in the work to have the base understanding of what Bitcoin is, and then once you understand that, which is going to take hundreds of hours of research, and then going into the next layer and seeing, okay, what's a Bitcoin treasury company and why are they just extremely popular over the next last few months. That's just a whole other rabbit hole, and the rabbit hole just keeps getting deeper and deeper. But people have to have that like you had mentioned with the grandfather, how he was just pointed and put everything into his business and built it up. Like you got to sort of have that ambition and sense of urgency to want this information and seek it out for yourself. So 1000% agree. But let's pivot back to some Bitcoin treasury talk, get back into microstrategy or strategy, that being the 600-pound gorilla in the room. People are trying to wrap their minds around still to this day, the strife, and stride. And so we wanted to start there and see what your thoughts were for these new preferreds that, Saylor and team have pulled together, and which one of these vehicles do you think will drive the most capital for the common A shareholders over time in order to buy more Bitcoin?
Let me take that one first. I think it's going to be Strife, because I think that's what the largest total addressable market is, right? Like if you think of that classic slide that's in a rectangle shape, Saylor and like other people share this all the time. The $200 and $300 trillion like biggest rectangles are fixed income and real estate, global fixed income, global real estate. And to me, the preferred vehicle for both of those things is not only a security and equity without any, physical domain risk. It's what they're looking for is yield. Most senior on the capital stack that they can possibly get with yield. They don't really care too much about like strike in the sense of like the convertible option, which strike is my personal favorite, right? So like, what do I think moves the needle the most? Strife, but strike is my personal favorite for the convertible option. But yeah, I mean, you think about like any nation's sovereign debt. Let's just use like U.S. T-bills and bonds. What people are looking for is to just like get the USD yield. That's it. And Strife is better than that because the yield is just higher. It like necessarily requires like a pro Bitcoin view or like why else would you be here? But it's a better product. So that's my answer on like which one moves the needle the most. Stride, I have to do a lot more work on this, to be honest. And that's kind of been the fun thing about MicroStrategy specifically is that like there's always been new things to learn. I didn't know the ins and outs of a convertible bond before MicroStrategy did their first one. And then it was like, okay, this is like a cool new thing to learn. So that's where I'm at with Stride now. I personally am in Strike and Strife because I understand both of them and because like they both fit my use case for my cash book, which I basically just use to pay my living expenses. So yeah, that was the second part of the question. And the first part of the question, just more broadly about strike, strife, stride, if that was the direction there. Keep going on that.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So with that, look, I was talking about this last night on Tim Kotzman's, marathon event, which was really epic. I think strike, strife, and stride is the most interesting and compelling corporate activity going on in the U.S. equity markets right now. If you think about the question of like, what is the purpose of a company? I think the purpose of a company is to like create profits or net income, let's say, that is hopefully it has to be above, but hopefully it's materially above one's total, expenses and CapEx in order to facilitate more growth, facilitate more expansion, hire more people, like create an economy. Like that's what the purpose of a company is. And when you think about how complicated that path is for basically every other company out there, every other non-Bitcoin treasury company, it's extremely difficult. It's possible, don't get me wrong, but as a base layer of like what I'm saying here, I would recommend folks listen to Saylor's 24 Risks of Equities or Saylor's 24 Equity Risk. You Google that, you'll find it. And that's really kind of like what opened my eyes up to and just further like enhanced my bullish view on Bitcoin is that like Bitcoin as an investment, as a store of value investment, is that all of these other companies really have a tough slog at it, right? With you have to buy raw materials and factories and you have to pay people and you have to lock in supply chain orders and you have to, deal with the kind of shifting pendulum in DC as it pertains to legislation for your industry, especially for like Bitcoin and crypto more broadly, right? Like that's just what we went through. Like the whole past 12 months was like this shift in pendulum and you have to deal with like competition risk and physical domain risk. What if your factory like catches on fire or gets taken out by a hurricane or a mudslide or there's just infinite number of like examples I could give here of like things that can go wrong with this, most notably with Tesla. Because I used to be in Tesla in like with a large allocation for 6 or 7 years or so. And, it's like that saying, the more you learn, the less you know. There's no way I could have fully understood that company from the hardware engineering, the software engineering, the manufacturing, the global supply chains that are interdependent on each other, the chemical, like the CFP, like some chemical phosphate, lithium phosphate battery, battery technology. That's like deep chemistry. You've got like, they're putting solar panels on the roof. They're building batteries that are the size of this room that I'm in. You know what I mean? There's so much craziness and complication going on all across the board, and so much money has to go into funding all of that crazy complexity. So that's one way of operating a business. Or there's this microstrategy way of operating a business where we're essentially creating a product that has the largest total addressable market of any market on earth. It's a superior product to all of the pre-existing things, which includes sovereign debt, like we talked about, corporate debt, high yielding corporate bonds, mortgage-backed securities, money market funds, mortgage-backed, I think I said MBS, any like rental real estate property, because that's essentially a fixed income contract with physical domain risk. Strike, Strife, and Stride is better than all of those things, and it's very frictionless. The margins are very high. The CapEx is very low. The amount of employees needed to pull this off is literally the 10-person finance team at Strategy. This is just such a interesting moment in life where, for some time now, I and like others have been of the belief that like it's like the best of all worlds. Normally we have a pros and cons list or a table or like a matrix where there's like multiple variables. There's like pros and cons, or some like counterbalance the others, and you have to like sit there and like really think through like what's the optimal decision. And again, I don't want to get carried away. I don't want to be called like a stock pumper, because especially because I'm planning on giving this equity to like my nieces and nephews. I'm not that guy. This just seems like the best of all worlds scenario, with the ability to keep doing this into the future, right? So that's one kind of core idea about Strategy today that I really, really embrace. The convertible bond only stuff was nice. I think we probably did that for a total of, I don't know, 25, 30 months. I think the first one was in 2021, and that was before I was in the stock. So it's unclear to me, but it was a couple years of time, right, where there was like opportunistic convertible bonds, and then us analysts would like adjust our numbers and like think through it and do all that stuff. I am very happy as to where we are now with the preferred perpetual securities, right? If the opportunity arises where it's maximally accretive to do convertible bonds, I hope we take that opportunity. But as far as understanding this business as it is today and the ability to scale this, I feel much better on the preferred side. And just to touch on that scale, this is all speculation. It's an idea myself and a few others are thinking through, specifically as it pertains to Strike. We think that, if when MicroStrategy does get to that $1,000 call, it's not a call option, but that convertible price optionality point, it would make sense at that point in time to then go ahead and relaunch a new Strike, same everything, different ticker symbol, but just a different conversion price, right? Whether it's $1,500 a share in MSTR or $2,000 a share in MSTR. So this is where like I start to get to thinking like, not only is this great for now, it's of course going to take time to get the broader investing class for them to be able to wrap their heads around this and adopt Bitcoin more and more. But the really exciting thing, like the parabola here, is that we can keep doing this in the future, unless I'm like materially misunderstanding something. As of now, I feel like there's no limit to MicroStrategy's ability to do this. So hence why I appear like very excited about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's glad you went into strike, strive, and stride. And yeah, even like with us, me, Sean, and yourself, we're in the market every day on Twitter, trying to learn as much as possible. So it's hard for us, or at least for myself, to learn all this stuff. So for the average person, I'm sure it's even more difficult. And you talked about getting the average person to invest is already a hard and difficult thing. So with all this, just having to learn all these new things is just makes it even harder. Uh, but do you have some base case for where strategy, like number of Bitcoin, like in terms of you mentioned $1,000 strategy price? Is that something that you like? Do you have a base case of like this is my price target by X date, or do you see it getting somewhere, or a certain number of Bitcoin that they can get maybe by 2030? Do you have any like metrics that you're looking at for the performance of MicroStrategy for people who want to invest in the company?
Yeah, so I'll start with the Bitcoin prediction there, and boy, is this a huge slice of humble pie, and I'll tell you why about it. Probably like 2 or 3 months before the presidential election, I don't know, call it like September or something like that, August, September, in that time frame, I had put out a post of projecting what MicroStrategy's, Bitcoin holdings would be over time, going out 10 years throughout the gold rush period. And what I did was I used the 3 year trailing like decay, right? The like amount of Bitcoin they're able to buy each day. I used that 3 year, 3 year trailing data, and then just projected it forward 3 times to give me 9. So, almost 10 years. I had projected that in like 2032, they would have like 430,000 Bitcoin, right? Without doing like higher order, like calculus or anything like that, just like a simple kind of like continuation of trend analysis. I was at like 430,000 Bitcoin in 2032. What of course changed that quite rapidly was the ATM right after the Trump victory, a convertible bond round right around November 20th or 21st, and that was right around the top for last year. So yeah, I've been massively wrong on and not that I was like stamping my name to that like 430 something thousand in 2032, but it's just crazy how quickly after that I was proven wrong, but in the right direction. So it's all good. Price predictions, I typically shy away from, especially saying them publicly. I had price predictions when I had big options positions in 2023 and 2024 because you have to. Whether you share them or not is up to the individual, but in your head, in order to determine the risk reward analysis, you have to set like a target price that you think it can get to. That way you can figure out how much you're in the money, divide that by what you paid for the contracts, and then see like, okay, this can go up 30 times, this can go up 40, 50x. And then, some of these guys who, rightfully did take a victory lap had 100, 200x, massive life-changing outcomes over the past couple of years. But right now, no real price targets. I do think what I will say though, as far as the substance piece, I think is more important. I don't think there's anything else more compelling in the US equity market. I don't think there's any understandable a future potential monopoly that's understandable today. I can get into why I don't think Palantir, counts, because I just don't think anyone can actually understand what they have going on. But like I'm of the Michael Saylor and Peter Thiel like school of thought belief that I want to own the dominant like tech monopoly of the future, right? Whether it was in Bitcoin or perhaps if there was a more compelling thing out there, I would flock to it. I haven't found it, and I'm not an AI guy. So I just simply benefit from AI through the chat GPTs of the world, and that's great. But I'm not like an NVIDIA person or OpenAI. Like I would never want to invest in that sort of thing. So for me, the best idea out there is the operating company who's the monopoly in the Bitcoin space. And to me, that's I'm going to keep calling it MicroStrategy forever because it's so ingrained. But to me, that strategy is always going to be strategy, and no one's going to be able to overtake them. So it's kind of the best of both worlds, especially for someone who's like an equity analyst and volatility analyst plus Bitcoiner. It's the best of both worlds of Bitcoin as the pristine collateral, like the forever hodl position. Perfect. Plus all the levers that can be pulled, both the ones that exist today and perhaps future levers to pull, such as like future strike, strife, stride type products. Again, that piece right there is speculation, complete speculation. I have no idea if more of these products are going to come out, but I am very optimistic about what's come out so far, right? Like we've tapped the ATMs of Strike, Strife, and Stride to the tunes of, tens of millions of dollars, let's say. I think it's optimal to be starting slow for the simple heuristic of Rome wasn't built in a day. And if we're talking about something that can like most properly or like most optimally address markets that are measured in the hundreds of trillions, we don't want to flood the zone with excess supply at the point in time where the company is really trying to like educate the broader investing community, Wall Street, as to why these products are so viable. And I think that's just going to gradually play out over time. So you wouldn't want to unnecessarily flood the zone with supply as we're like getting this thing off the ground, as we're getting this plane off the ground. You know what I mean? And I still think we're like stationary on the runway right here, right now. Like we haven't even started taxiing to the actual launch point. So to me, it makes perfect sense to start small and then slowly scale, increase, slowly scale, increase, and just let that gradually play out over time as we get more and more broader Bitcoin acceptance. Let's say perhaps we don't get to full adoption with many folks, but we get to acceptance, which makes them open-minded about a Bitcoin-backed security credit type instrument.
Good stuff. So let's pivot from strategy. And as you're well aware, there's been a lot of talks on metaplanet versus strategy. Does metaplanet have a monopoly as well in comparison to strategy? There's a lot going on the Twitter or X spaces. But what's your overall thesis for metaplanet? Because metaplanet has been, on a lot of people's radar as of late. They've been executing their Bitcoin treasury strategy pretty aggressively. So, we're seeing these Bitcoin treasury companies pop up left and right. Metaplanet, has sort of been stealing the show, if you may, as far as where they're at now in comparison to last year. Obviously, strategy at 600,000, you really can't compete with that. But what's your thoughts on metaplanet? Where do you see them going? And also, let's make this a two-part question. What about all the other Bitcoin treasury companies? It seems like this is like the ICO phase back in 2017 with all these like it's a new company. Yeah. It's hard to keep up with every single day. So what's your take on just all these companies coming up left and right as well?
You mentioned there was some chatter and controversy around this MicroStrategy metaplanet thing. I don't know. I haven't seen it. Can you send me a couple links about this? No, yeah, I've seen it. I've participated in it. I want to take the approach of being very diplomatic, being fun about this, being friendly. I think there's like just a disclosure at the top. There's no, I get that this isn't like rooting for professional sports teams. I'm a New York Giants fan. They've sucked for the past 10 years, but I don't actually care. I'm not going to like debate people about their football team. I understand that this is much more high stakes because we have like actual money in this and that sort of stuff. But I just hope we can all approach this in a very fun, friendly way, because life is too short to be fighting these like perpetual battles when we're really all on the same team. And just to highlight that, like, we're at the birth of like a new industry, dare I say, like a micro industry, pun intended, in the sense that like Bitcoin's the real industry for me. You know what I mean? Like, that's my belief. Now we have this like Bitcoin treasury company industry, which is like a one derivative down of that. And I think that's just so awesome and so cool to be like participating in. So yeah, let's all be friends. That's what I'm saying. But okay, so MicroStrategy versus Metaplanet. You know, I think of both of them as being the dominant players, you know, in the West with strategy and in the global East with Metaplanet. Of course, if I had to say, like, I do favor one over the other. I do favor like MicroStrategy's like global dominance as the monopoly and the moat as it pertains to them. But not only is there nothing wrong with Metaplanet, it's a wonderfully run business. You know, I was at MicroStrategy World 2024 when Dylan LeClaire was having those conversations with Saylor about like, hey, should I take this like director of Bitcoin job at this like, you know, 3-star hotel company all the way out in Japan? And then you fast forward to today, and he's a trillionaire, and he's you know, he's now like the market is now fully realizing like how smart, how sharp, how like sophisticated he is even at his age. And I'm just joking about the trillionaire stuff, but it's just it's just so righteous to see like a guy that I admire, that I look up to, a friend of mine, participate in like the best stock in the world in 2024. And I missed it the whole way up in 2024, mainly because I was just so locked in on MicroStrategy. You know what I mean? It's like, I live in the US. I understand US politics. I understand like the US operating system. Like, maybe I don't even fully understand it, but I understand it better than I would for any other country. So I just feel more comfortable here. Plus, I could only get it on Interactive Brokers in the beginning. And while I did get some, it was such a painful process just to get filled. So I'm don't get me wrong, I'm kicking myself for not going in more to this. But then when we had the mtplf, which I just learned is not an ADR, it's some other type of listing. But once that came out, it became like much easier to take like a larger size, especially after having seen the performance. And I'm not even really talking about the stock performance when I say that. I'm talking about the rate of change in Bitcoin and Bitcoin per share. It's been phenomenal. It's been an absolute masterclass of rapidly acquiring Bitcoin and fully participating in the positive base effect math change. And for anyone who's never listened to me before or anything like that, what I'm saying there is, when you're starting something at a very small number, say 1 Bitcoin in the treasury or 10 Bitcoin in the treasury, you have so much upward space where you can 10x that, 100x that, 1000x that, and beyond. But if you're something that's, and not to pick on these guys at all, but just to use them as an example, 21 SEP, the Jack Mallers led company, you know, last I checked, they're coming in at 42,000, which there's also nothing wrong with that, because they're trying to position themselves more as like institutional. Whereas, you know, Metaplanet, I would say, is perhaps retail for now, but swimming in the direction of institutional. So Metaplanet's put on the absolute masterclass of benefiting from that base effect math effect. The question for now is, and others have too, right? This is where that second part of the question comes in, like the other ones. Smarter web company. These types of things do not happen every day. That level of like number go up. The blockchain group, same thing. These things going up 10x, 100x. I mean, you know, multiples and multiples in weeks and months. it's just unbelievable. The question is, now on a go forward basis, do these exponentials continue? Or I think the more sophisticated view would be, when are they going to stop? Not do they continue, right? Because we all know that the gravity, the main overarching concept here is the 21 million Bitcoin. So there invariably becomes a point where this stops. When is the point? I'm sorry, when is the question? That's the main point of when. And markets have a very, very long, sophisticated history of pricing these things in about 6 months before it stops. I believe it was the dot-com bubble in February, I believe, or either February or March of 2000 was the absolute high in the NASDAQ price-wise. I believe earnings topped in both the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ companies in September or October of that year. Like IBM and Intel's and Cisco's like earnings per share net income were still growing while the stocks are being like bloodbath annihilated, where it'd be like 20% down day, then flat, then 3% up, then 17% down day, then 2% up, then 5% up, then 12% down. Like, as those companies were going through that degree of price and market cap volatility, which, by the way, impacts everyone's RSUs. I learned about this from a good friend of mine who I won't name here, but I learned about this from a good friend of mine. And like, when the market cap is shifting like that, it has real life impacts on the employees who are expecting to be able to like exercise those options and have that be like part of their compensation plan. So like, the boom bust of markets creates a boom bust effect in people's lives. To wrap here though, all those earnings peaked in like, August, September, October, even though price peaked 6, 7, 8 months before that. So that's my kind of guiding heuristic for this, is that like a metaplanet, a smarter web company, a blockchain group, they might keep maintaining the exponential, even though like you're facing serious multiple compression. I believe it was Bill Gurley from, he's Silicon Valley, VC type background. And he said multiple compression is a BITCH. And boy, is he right about that. Not in the derogatory sense of the word, but just in the physical pain that it feels to go through multiple compression, which, by the way, can very much happen in a Bitcoin bull market. It will definitely happen in a macro Bitcoin bear market, but it can also happen in a Bitcoin bull market. An example of that would be Metaplanet in July or August of last year had a clean 80% drawdown, like not rounding it up. It was clean 80% drawdown in about a 2 or 3 week period in between the end of July, beginning of August. And there's nothing to say that that can't happen for any of these other companies, especially when they're trading at 8, 10, 12, 30. I think like Smarter Web might have peaked at 100x MNAV, depending on how you actually run these calculations. And it's like, that's a natural phenomena of markets. And I keep coming back to the dot-com bubble, because even though many of those companies were, faced an unfortunate exit of bankruptcy, nothing has been more impactful in our everyday lives and broader tech industry and just the broader capitalism GDP of America than the internet and what that's created for like mobile and like Saylor's like mobile wave thesis and what's that's created for us having this podcast right now. Even though the NASDAQ faced a clean 90, Druckenmiller says 95% from the absolute high to the absolute low, many bankrupted companies, it still gave way and gave birth to the most dominant industry that I think any of us could perhaps think of. So even though there might be some carnage, and I'd be betting that at some point there will be, I really do kind of think that nothing stops this train, to give Lynn Alden a shout out on the quote. But I just can't imagine anything stopping the train of Bitcoin corporate adoption because of the forever time preference of, the forever hold of a company that you want to have live forever.
Yeah, thanks for going into that. I was going to be the next question about the risk with the Bitcoin treasury companies, but yeah, I think it's very important for people to realize that the MNAV, especially on these smaller companies, is that, like you said, 10, 20, 30 for some of them, that can definitely shrink or compress, especially if we go into a bear market or a down period in the market. So that's something that I think people should also consider when investing in the smaller companies and they're looking for the next metaplanet or the next strategy. So that is good to know. But just want to give you, final thoughts just to wrap it up. Appreciate all the time that you gave to us here today. Is there any other things that you want to mention to our audience about Bitcoin, MicroStrategy, any of the Bitcoin treasury companies? Anything else you just want to go into?
Yeah, and first, guys, just let me say this is awesome. Like, I love your guys' style of operating. It's like it's chill, but it's having like intellectual conversations. Like, I really support you guys, your personalities, like all that stuff. So whatever I can do to help you guys, flourish and blossom and any of that stuff. And I'll save the rest for when we, wrap this. But final thoughts here. Yeah, so I would say that there's much more to be optimistic about than pessimistic about going forward. I think as long as the economy, the political state of affairs, which there's a ton of volatility with that, with this Elon back and forth stuff with Trump and him trying to start the American Party, there's a lot of volatility there. But as long as the system, the economy can just keep chugging along, I think there's a lot more to be excited about than pessimistic about in terms of the rapid growth of Bitcoin treasury companies. Not only what that does for the growth and proliferation of Bitcoin itself, but there's also real life impact here. Like a lot of my friends that, when we started doing QuantBros and then like True North, a lot of them are like fielding job offers. A lot of them, like Jeff and Ben, are on the board of a company and they both have full-time jobs at Bitcoin companies. And like there's more and more of these examples starting to happen. So there can be like real life-changing positive impact, where people can leave the job that they don't really like, but they want to keep working and do something that they like love. So that's awesome. And my last thing here, and my only word of caution would be, I would want to scan through all of these companies like thoroughly before taking a position on any of them. That's why I'm mostly focused on like MicroStrategy. It's what I have the highest conviction in. It's what I feel the most confident about, like the dominant tech monopoly of our lifetime. And it's so easy from the human psychology perspective to get like swept up in the mania. There's the classic Sir Isaac Newton example of this with the tulip mania, or maybe that was the Dutch East India Company, either one of those, or perhaps both. And there's a million other examples I could rattle off, but it's so easy to get swept up in the mania. For me, what I think the better, approach is, you need time to do due diligence on these things. And, $1 at the bottom is worth way more than $1 at the top. So I would just, for me, I want to see a real differentiator in these Bitcoin treasury companies. Like, I get it. You've mastered the MSTR playbook. You can, raise a bunch of money through different like mechanisms and levers. But how can you create cash? Can you create a Bitcoin type instrument or product or service that creates cash? Can you create free cash flow in order to use that to buy Bitcoin, or in order to use that to buy back the stock, right? Like, is there any mechanism of driving free cash flow? So for me, I'm going to really want to see differentiators, not just, oh, we raised money through this ATM or this convertible bond or that, and we're diluting the shareholders. I understand the accretive dilution, but it's still percentage ownership of the company is going down, right? So I'd want to see something in that capacity where folks aren't losing their total percentage ownership of the company. But yeah, gentlemen, this has really been awesome. Thanks so much for having me on.